Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a new video. My apologies for not having a video out yesterday. Part of staying up until 5 a.m. was the recognition that I would fall asleep immediately after I turned off that stream. So, my apologies that there wasn't a video out, but I figured that we might as well start out the month by getting these out of the way because they were a bit delayed by the UK local elections, the Canadian elections, and the 2026 predictions kind of slipped through the cracks. But we do have some pretty crucial predictions. We're starting off with probably the least competitive of the three. Virtually everyone except Twitter boomers and leftists agree that the Senate will not be competitive. The Senate, by current composition, is this: Republicans control almost all of their seats out of Ohio is not a Democrat seat, but almost all of their seats are in safe states. If you go by how a state voted in 2024 per president. If you want to go through the Democratic states that voted for Kamala Harris, under 10%. You got New Mexico, Minnesota, Michigan voted for Trump, so we'll put that differently. This is not margins. This is not my prediction. It's just a way to signify how these states are voting. Georgia also did end up voting for Trump. Virginia, New Jersey, kind of out of nowhere, ended up narrowly under 10%. And could be close this time, especially depending on those 2025 gubernatorial results. Donate money to the poll, but could be competitive based on those gubernatorial results, which we will be seeing this year, and New Hampshire. While for Republicans, you have Maine is in a Kamala Harris state, not a particularly narrow one. Susan Collins is likely running for re-election in a Harris plus 7 state. If she doesn't run for re-election, that's an insta flip. But it's expected to be quite competitive. And Tom Tillis out of North Carolina is running in a Trump plus 3 state. Otherwise, there's not a single Senate seat up in a state that Donald Trump won by under 10%, which means that for Democrats to win the Senate, remember they need 51. So even if they end up flipping North Carolina, Maine, even if this ends up being the final Senate, not Texas, they still lose control of the Senate. The next narrow state would be Ohio, though Republicans do have a pretty strong incumbent there. And then after that, I think by margin, it would either be Florida or Iowa. Um, Iowa is a Trump plus, what is that? 13.3 state. And Florida, I think, is slightly narrower at a Trump plus 13.1 state. So for Democrats to win the Senate, it would look something like this. They'd be taking down incumbents in North Carolina, Ohio, Florida, Maine, holding open seats in Minnesota, Michigan, and New Hampshire, all very narrow Harris states, except for Michigan, which was a Trump state, and defending incumbents in Georgia, Virginia, New Jersey, and New Mexico. So it's a pretty brutal path for them. Really, their best scenario is to set themselves up for a potential Senate win. Come 2028, even then, that'll be hard. This is the 2028 Senate map. This is excluding the fact that there's potential that Pennsylvania's Democratic senator could be up for re-election, or could be up for election sooner, because John Fetterman has had some public coming to light public issues, like his wife not is not having the best time. He texts while drives. He does seem to have some mental health issues. But even come 2028, the Senate map looks like this. Democrats had a pretty good 2022, which meant that they have a bunch of these Senate seats, but it also means that they will be defending quite a few Senate seats. Um, Come 2028, if Republicans win by a lot at the top of the ticket, you have one, two, three, four, five potential flips. But if Democrats, hold their own or even win at the top of the ticket, I have one, two potential flips. Democrats don't end up winning the presidency. They would need both these flips, which means if, a Republican holds on in Wisconsin, um, or if Republicans hold on in North Carolina, or, even if trends, they flip both these states, but then Arizona or Nevada ends up flipping, they would end up losing the Senate. So Democrats Probably for the Senate map, they want the bare minimum for a good night is a two-seat gain in Maine and North Carolina, and they probably want to gain something else. They have some good recruits in some states, um, and I'm not going to completely preclude the possibility of Democrats picking up one extra Senate seat, like out of a fluke freak accident. The GOP nominates a horrible candidate. Democrats nominate someone phenomenal. They have incredible turnout, but the chances of that happening in two Senate seats, in Trump plus, well, a lot of these states that Democrats are considering contesting are like Trump plus 15. It's not that likely. But without any further ado, let's get into it. We will start off with the safe Democrat states: Oregon, Colorado, Illinois. Even though it's an open seat, it was only a Harris plus 11 state. I think what you'll see, especially since Trump's approval rating isn't that great, and some of the generic ballot polls aren't that great for Republicans, I still think it's around a D plus 3 or so generic ballot. I'm not going to jump the gun and say, like, D plus 8, guys, is going to be bigger than 2018, because that's retarded. And by the way, even if it's a D plus 8 environment, Democrats still don't flip the Senate. Uh, that's something to keep in mind. But you will have the national environment swinging left, even though Illinois, I think, is trending right. That's my personal interpretation of the results. I think you might see Democrats fall off in Cook County, especially since it is an open seat. Um, and you'll see some of these suburban areas perhaps at least hold steady for the GOP. I think overall you'll see turnout go down enough that getting Illinois under 10 is a little bit out of reach. But if things sour for Democrats, I could see it being like a 9 point margin, especially since Republicans have a potentially good bench that I don't think is anywhere near flipping. Delaware, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, um, all safe Democrat. There's one more I'll potentially include. I think I'll leave it off for now. But Democrats currently at 40 seats, which means if Republicans win every remaining seat, they got a supermajority. I don't know if that's going to happen, but safe Republican, Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, even though there is an independent running there, he did run in 2022 as a Democrat. He got his ass handed to him. I don't think him changing party registration is going to help him too much there. We'll talk about another independent running for Senate in a little bit. Montana, I mean, Montana's a pretty Republican trending state. Uh, you are seeing. I could see some of these native areas potentially swing back to Democrats, but the problem is you're really not seeing Democrats make up any gains in urban areas. And Daines is a rather strong incumbent. He won by 10 against the popular governor in 2020, so I think you should be able to hold on. I'm also going to include Oklahoma, Kansas. You have Roger Marshall up this time, I think. Yeah, Moran is 2022 and 2028. So this would be Roger Marshall, a relatively non-controversial incumbent, a strong incumbent for the GOP. Um, Democrats really don't have a bench. You could run Laura Kelly, but like at some point, that's just, oh, we'll pick the one candidate who run statewide in Kansas and run them, ignoring any circumstance and how it wasn't a federal election. Like, she could get it under 10, but at some point, this was a Trump plus 16 state. We've been hearing about how it's going to flip for the last decade. It hasn't. I don't think that 2026 will be the time where it ends up flipping. Alaska, Dan Sullivan's also a rather strong incumbent for the GOP. Um, I could see it being under 10, especially if you have a rather large national weight, but so far there's not even any evidence whatsoever that Democrats have a party in Alaska outside Mary Peltola. And Mary Peltola, the only Democrat to win statewide in Alaska since 2008. On 2008 was against an ultra corrupt incumbent. Um, she didn't do too well last time she was on the ballot, so I don't think Alaska Senate will be particularly competitive. Then we have Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Sorry, Kyle Sweister. I don't think it's going to work out. Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and some of the like potentially competitive states. South Carolina, a very very right trending state. Lindsey Graham is not a strong incumbent whatsoever, but Democrats did spend like millions against him. With I think the former DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, maybe former South Carolina Democratic Party chair. But Jamie Harrison was supposed to make it somewhat close. He ended up losing by 10. barely outrunning the top ticket with millions behind him. I don't think Lindsey Graham is a weak enough incumbent to get a state that's trending this Republican at all close. I'll also include Florida here. You have Ashley Moody seeking re-election. I think that's her. Yeah, Ashley Moody is the senator, if I remember correctly. She's a relatively strong former statewide elected official appointed to the Senate seat after Rubio resigned. This is a, I mean, it's notorious for being right trending. We'll get to another right trending state later. That isn't as notorious for being right trending, but like Florida, everyone knows that Florida is shifting off a cliff for the GOP. Like the smallest shift was still 1 point to Trump, and the largest shift Miami-Dade 20 points to Trump. Like Democrats' time in Florida, like you can count the minutes of life left in the state Democratic Party. We honestly probably have to talk about the GOP netting seats in the Miami-Dade area, and we'll definitely talk about those before we talk about the Senate race at all being competitive. Even the gubernatorial race should be more competitive because Democrats could potentially run a good candidate there, but Democrats have no one. Moody's a strong incumbent. Um, Florida isn't even that much more Democrat in off-year elections. I see no reason why she shouldn't be able to hold on by 10%. I'll also include Nebraska here. Um, I just really don't think Democrats have too much of a chance in Nebraska. Um, the state Democratic Party and the National Democratic Party pulled out all the stops for Dan Osborne in 2024 against Deb Fisher, a very weak incumbent, as proven by how terrible she did. She did not at all know how to message. Um, Osborne was able to do pretty well because he ran as a Democrat. But he ran as a Democrat who could get potentially Republicans onto his side. Obviously, that's the blueprint. It's not like, oh, running an independent will have these different benefits. Like, I thought potentially he would do better in the rural areas, like better than he did. Um, but lose a bit more in like Douglas and Sarpy County. This is just the map of Nebraska. If you shifted it 15 or so points to the left from here, like down to Sarpy County, flipping narrowly and all, like he he has appeal to these suburban areas, specifically because Fisher was not a strong incumbent there. They talk about his pro-union working class message. There's not really that many pro-union working class voters in Sarpy County. Like, obviously, you have some stuff that bleeds over from Omaha, but for the most part, that's not exactly what Sarpy County, very big suburban county, is known for. I just think he's rumored to run again. Against Pete Ricketts. Pete Ricketts is an infinitely stronger incumbent, elected in 2024, uh, but by a little bit, a 25-point margin, just something small. Yeah, I think there's a chance he could do better. Um, I think he'd be much better suited running for governor, something less partisan. But like at some point, he's just going to become a perennial candidate, and you're not going to capture the same flair. As in 2024, we had massive super PACs backing him from Democrats, which really taints his working class message, doesn't it? Running against a particularly weak incumbent, Pete Ricketts, he's not too strong of an incumbent, but he's nowhere near Deb Fisher. I think the national wave could potentially knock this under 10, but I'd say for now, Pete Ricketts is able to run a good enough campaign, be carried by Pillin, that he's able to win this race by about 10 to 11%. I'm also going to throw in Ohio here. This could potentially see a bit of a shift to the left. I don't really think so. You have John Husted as the Republican nominee, appointed to J.D. Vance's Senate seat after he won the vice presidency. This really isn't that left trending of a state. I've heard some people say, "Oh well, the suburbs are going to revert anytime now." Like when that's what you're betting on, like this mystical suburban surge that was supposed to flip Delaware County in 2024. How'd that go? Like, when you're just holding your breath, waiting for the suburbs to give out for Republicans, like it's not going to work out. I could see the GOP doing worse. Their coalition really isn't built for off-year elections in Ohio. It isn't trending that Republican, but I do think Husted, even though the national nominee is working against him, Democrats really don't have a nominee against him. Most of the at all important nominees or big names would much rather run for governor than for Senate, because I think most people assume that this isn't a competitive Senate race. I don't know how well Husted would do in some of these urban areas like Mahoning, um, Trumbull, Portage, but I think he'd pick it up enough in the suburbs, like Hamilton, even the suburbs of Franklin, Lucas, Cuyahoga. He did pretty well um, in his 2022 run. I think he was on the same ticket as Kasich. Otherwise, all of those statewide officials won by 20 points. He probably shouldn't underrun Kasich's performance too much or Trump's performance. I think he could theoretically create like an amalgam of like doing well in suburban areas while kind of holding up in some of these rural areas. And I just don't think Democrats are situated to win Ohio anytime soon. Like, you lost with an incumbent by three with a not so strong Republican nominee. Now Republicans have a very strong incumbent, and Democrats don't have a candidate. It's probably going to end up safe Republican. But that's it for the safe Republican states, which means Democrats, if they sweep every remaining state, they get a bare Senate majority, which means it's just about as likely that Republicans get a supermajority as Democrats getting 51 seats. What a competitive Senate map. Like, I said this kind of a little bit in 2024, but like sometimes you just don't have competitive Senate maps. And I think Democrats can win the Senate in the future, but for now, they have to run the table. If they win every Senate seat uh, in every swing state, they win 52 seats. Republicans do that, they win something like 60. I think they win 62. And that's not even counting states like New Jersey, New Hampshire, Virginia, New Mexico, which, even though they're probably bound to swing against Republicans eventually, like Republicans could potentially pick off one or two Senate seats in the interim. Uh, Depending on how well they do in years like 2026, 2028, even 2030. And also another problem is you have one of those swing state senators is in 2030. Dave McCormick is from a swing state up in 2030, which means Democrats have to win every single swing state Senate seat up for reelection um, in 2026 and 2028 to get a 51 seat majority. Otherwise, they have to win seats in say Republican states, which worked out really well for them in the 2024 Senate map, right? Those Senate seats in say Republican states with incumbents running for reelection, those worked out so well, right? But I think the likely Democrat states, New Jersey was the one I was debating. Cory Booker's a rather strong incumbent. I just think the state's trending Republican enough that even though he wins by like 9.5, it's narrowly under 10. Though I could definitely see him winning by 10%. I just think you'll see some of the North Jersey trends bite him in the ass in his reelection bid. Even though I do think he could potentially do better in South Jersey. Um, he is from North Jersey, so there's a chance he could hold up relatively well there. But I think even if he outperforms Harris, like, that's not saying much. When the state was nearly under five for her, even with a blue wave, it's right trending enough that I think it'll probably be narrowly under 10. Virginia, I think this depends on whether they force out Mark Warner. It's a Harris plus six state. It's likely to swing away from the GOP in years like 2025 and 2026, and Warner is a pretty strong incumbent. But you've seen the general trend of Democrats forcing out oldish incumbents, especially in swing states like Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, Illinois. Obviously, Illinois is not a swing state, but like the rest of those could be competitive, especially if it were a neutral or even red wave year. Those would be battleground states. Um, and I think they could potentially force out Warner as well. There's been some talk about that. I think he runs for re-election. I think if he runs for re-election, it could potentially be a safe margin because he is an old performer. But also, he did only outperform Biden by two. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Kane won by a similar 12-point margin in 2018. I just think that you're seeing the median margin for Virginia Senate races be around 9%. I really don't see any reason why that would dissipate. I could see it being a potentially higher margin for Democrats, Republicans to run a no name. But just because there's potential that Warner gets forced out, and even if he runs, I don't think he'd necessarily be guaranteed to get a 10-point margin. I think it'd be narrowly under 10%. I'm also going to include Mexico here. You have a relatively strong incumbent running for reelection this time around. Obviously, 2024, you had Heinrich. 2026, I think it's Ben Ray Lujan, who is the Democrat running for reelection. He's somewhat strong. He's not the strongest. He didn't do that great against Ronchetti in 2020. Underperformed the top of the ticket, but I think he should be able to hold. New Mexico really isn't trending that Republican. The same people who think that New Mexico is trending Republican tell us that Oklahoma will flip Democrat in 2026. Not exactly the best sources. I'm just always going to bully him for that. But the problem is, even though you are seeing to some extent the cities shift Republican, it's not really enough, and the other shifts aren't in big enough areas. And I don't think that type of trend would carry over between years. I think he wins by less than 2020, especially since I think it'll be a worse environment for Democrats than 2020, um, which doesn't bode well for the Senate map up. That was last up in 2020. I think like D+3. It's worse than the D+4 to D+3 environment in 2020, but I still think he improves. I think he wins by like 8 to 9, but not a margin over 10%. Um, I think I'll also include Minnesota here. You do have Peggy Flanagan, or you have actually a competitive primary now. Excuse me, a Peggy Flanagan versus Angie Craig. It does look like Flanagan got the jump on Craig, but Craig would be a phenomenal recruit for Democrats if she won the primary. I don't think it'll be too competitive. Even if she doesn't win the primary, Republicans could obviously run a terrible nominee, but like we say that every cycle. Oh, well, I think that you know, Republicans are going to run Adolf Hitler in Mississippi, and therefore it'll flip Democrat. Like we say that every cycle. But I think even if Republicans run someone competent, Flanagan wouldn't be the best nominee. I think she could potentially knock it under 5 points, but uh, I think Craig would be able to win by like 8 to 9. She's an overperformer. She up from the top of the ticket in her district over here, a very suburban district. That's the area where Minnesota Democrats really need to continue pushing it for that. Because, like, I'm not sure 2026 is the time, but you will eventually see these rural areas solidify for the GOP. I think Republicans have a lot of missed potential in Minnesota that will come. Like, they're eventually going to start putting up better performances in these rural areas as long as the coalitions continue as they currently are. But they're going to continue pushing the margins higher in these rural areas. Democrats need to improve in suburban areas to keep Minnesota in the column, or at least keep it as like a D+4 state. Um, I think that they do probably going into 2026, and I'll say it's like a 6 to 7 point Democrat margin. They outperform Harris, though having it be an open seat could lead to a little bit of complications. As for likely Republican, I think Texas is likely Republican. Um, it does look like Ken Paxton is the presumptive nominee for Senate. Uh, John Cornyn is trailing in almost every poll released to the public, and it's rumored, of course, but like the news leaks are he's losing by like 20 in every internal poll. Uh, I think he should probably lose that primary, even if Trump endorses him. I think Paxton's the favorite. We'd have a pretty horrible poll come out that had Colin Allred at 52% to Ken Paxton's 47% in a hypothetical general election matchup. Um, I don't do drugs, but when I saw that, I thought, Jesus Christ, I want to smoke what he's smoking just to feel what it feels like to be like, oh yes, yes, Ken Paxton will lose by 15 to Colin Allred. Like, wow, this guy who got 44.6% is supposedly at 52% now. Uh, Ted Cruz is a historically unpopular senator. Um, like especially for Texas standards, who are relatively okay with their statewide elected officials. Like Ted Cruz, historically has always been unpopular, and obviously he's not like despised like some other people will talk about. in this Senate map, but like he's really not well liked whatsoever. Um, so the fact that Allred only put up like I guess it's 8.5% loss against him is pretty pathetic. Allred barely won counties like Tarrant, Williamson, lost counties like Starr, Maverick, Zapata. Like that's a pretty pathetic performance. That's worse than the no name that they put up against John Cornyn in 2020. I think it'll be closer than 2020. I definitely don't think that Paxton would have as much appeal to the suburbs as a John Cornyn or even Donald Trump. I think Tarrant, Williamson probably flip, and I think you'll see some of these Hispanic areas revert to some extent. I mean, Allred didn't do that bad uh, in them in 2024, but I don't think it'll be too competitive. I think as you'll see the general election approach, Cornyn will get more of the Republican base on his side. And that poll that shows Allred up by 15 is just a Cornyn push poll. It's complete bullshit. Iowa as well. I could see Iowa being closer. Joni Ernst is not the strongest nominee. It is a relatively right trending state, more so than Ohio. I think it's very overhyped, Democrats winning here because of the special elections. People are like, oh my god, you bring up one special election in Staten Island, then you bring up the fact that Republicans, as I'm recording this video, are leading in the Fort Worth mayoral election with 70% of the vote. Republicans winning 70% of the vote in there. Oh, you don't bring up these special elections only when it helps your party. And their entire basis on Iowa being competitive is the Seltzer poll and this like built-in wiring in their heads, like, oh yes, Iowa must be competitive eventually. Um, and like two special elections uh, from I think Lee County, like the very south of Lee County, and Scott Clinton Jackson area. Oh, and you had one more in Cedar Rapids that went Democrat. Wow, I'm shocked. But the Iowa coalition really isn't built for these off-year elections. There's a legitimate chance that this could be close unexpected. I definitely it's a bit of a hot take, but I think that this was closer to like a lean margin than to a safe margin. I could see Ernst underperforming by a lot, but she did good in 2020, even with Trump not putting up the best performance in the state compared to like this performance where you nearly won Black Hawk County. I think she would do worse in the rural areas. Turnout wouldn't be that great. Republicans really don't have a good statewide ticket in Iowa, but it does seem like more focus is on the gubernatorial election. I think for good reason. I think that one could potentially be closer. I'd say as of now, like a 7 point margin for Republicans, slightly less than Trump's 2020 win in the state. So now we have the core five swing states that will determine how big of a Senate majority Republicans get and whether Democrats could potentially take back the Senate come 2028 and whether most of Trump's agenda can be passed with one, two, three Republican defections, depending on vacancies, etc., etc. Like, if Republicans have 56 Senate seats, Trump can pass whatever he wants. If Republicans have 51, he's got to be a bit more careful. But I think we'll start off west to east because I have some hot takes for the east. We'll start off with Michigan. So Michigan is a Trump plus 1.4 state. You have three main Democrat candidates. I'm sure there'll be others, but three ones really in contention. You have Haley Stevens, representative from District 11, Oakland, kind of the suburban core of Oakland. Obviously, you have a bit more of Oakland. E.g., District 9, with Lisa McClain, has most of the rest of Oakland. Um, Very Republican heavy, exurban, but she has most of like the core of Oakland County. It's more Democrat for that. You have a little bit of Oakland that's in the 12th and 10th, but for the most part, the two parts of Oakland are District 9, District 11. She's from the more Democrat portion. She's not really a strong candidate. She underperformed in 2020, 2022, and 2024. I mean, it's been by virtue of like it not being a competitive seat whatsoever that she's been able to, I think, outperform the top of the ticket if I'm not mistaken. Don't cite me on a source. Cite me as a source for that. But she would be an okay nominee. I think she'd do okay in suburban areas. I think she might lose a bit in Wayne County. Um, she wouldn't do that great in some of the rural areas of Michigan, which if Republicans are going to push forward, their margins in Michigan is going to be one from the rural areas and two from Wayne County. Like she would shift the suburbs back to Democrats, but the problem is by how much. You have to ask that question. Because like if it were Minnesota, or if it were a- another slightly Democrat leaning state, like New Mexico, Virginia, like she wouldn't have to actively do better than 2024 to win it, but she does have to outperform 2024 to win. Um, and honestly, in some parts, she even has to outperform Biden in 2020 just because you took that massive hit in Wayne County in 2024, and you're probably not going to get that back, especially since Haley Stevens isn't exactly the most beloved on the Palestine issue. So she legitimately could do worse than Kamala Harris in Wayne County, but she would pick it up in the rest of the state. I think she'd be an okay nominee, but she'd definitely be within risk of losing. We also have Marilyn McMorrow, who's like the resist lib um, from the Trump era. She's like a suburban wine mom, except she actually ran for public office. She's going to be supported by a bit more of a progressive base compared to Haley Stevens. I think she could do a little bit better in some of the suburban areas and a little bit better with youth voters. I, I don't know if she'd win the primary at this point because you would have the progressive vote split by another candidate who I'll mention in a little bit. And also, she's a state senator. Haley Stevens is a U.S. representative. Like the disparity in name recognition, how strong each candidate is large. But you also do have one more candidate. I might be confusing him for another tower hitter, but if I'm not mistaken, his name is Abdul El Said. Running for Michigan Senate. He ran for governor in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Lost in the primary by a bit to Gretchen Whitler. He would not be a good nominee. First of all, his last name itself would kill him in most of the rest of the state. He would do okay in the Palestine area. The the uh, what's the word? Religious dictatorship. Um, and the theocracy of Hamtramck and Dearborn, but otherwise, he really wouldn't do good anywhere else. I think he'd collapse along the suburbs and the rural areas. He's also a like it's not just oh he's a Muslim, therefore everyone with him. He's also a vicious progressive. Um, who would lose all appeal in the rest of the state in places like Oakland, even Genesee. I think probably Genesee would flip if he were the nominee. I legitimately think he would lose the Senate election, but I'm going to go under the impression that Haley Stevens is the nominee. I think she'd do okay. I'm torn between having it as tilt Democrat and lean Democrat. I just think because of the wave, and because I seriously doubt that all of this was the Palestine issue. Because if Wayne County swung 9 points Republican, because oh my God, it was Palestine. Like Haley Stevens is much more antagonistic on Palestine than Kamala Harris, and like legitimately, there's a chance that Wayne County is like 60% Democrat to 37% Republican in that scenario, and you're not winning statewide in Michigan with that as a Democrat. But I think it's more just general trends. I think you took the hit in 2024. Like this was kind of a one-time thing. 9 points. I think it'll have like maybe 3 points at most in 2026, which makes the state competitive, but I think makes it very narrowly, like 1.1% margin, a lean Democrat state. Though, if McMorrow's the nominee, or God forbid for Democrats, El Said is the nominee, we have to start talking about Michigan as a competitive state. Georgia, this really depends on Kemp running. I think if Kemp runs, it's probably off the table for Democrats. Like, even if Trump's approval stays where it is, which I think it'll go up a little bit, um, I- just because I think you have most problems for the Trump administration coinciding at once. And I also think Libra polls are bullshit, but that's something against the point. I think even if it stays as it is, Kemp would beat Ossoff. And he'd beat him by like 2 to 3 points, just because the Georgia Democrat coalition is not built for off-year elections. Almost every other state, I would say the opposite, because you rely a lot on the white working class as a Republican. Like most of the Rust Belt, Republicans do terrible in these and off years because your coalition is not built for off years. But in Georgia, you would have to face a pretty significant Democrat turnout spike as a Republican to end up losing here. You look at even 2022, uh, Herschel Walker, one of the most phenomenally terrible candidates in almost every aspect, lost by one um, on that initial ballot. And genuinely, had you not had such a turnout dip for Republicans because of their terrible performance in 2022 and just depression over like it's not gonna determine Senate control, Republicans are doing so bad, the GOP is dead. Like legitimately, Walker would have won that runoff. The problem for Democrats is you really haven't won anything in Georgia in these off-year elections besides the 2022 Senate race, which was GOP depression in that second round, and also Walker being a terrible candidate, and the 2021 Senate race, because 2020 had those races been one Republican versus one Democrat, no third parties, Republicans would have won them. But 2021, the runoffs in those Senate races were predominantly because Republicans were working against each other. Trump honestly probably didn't want them to win. Uh, what's her name? It's not McSally. Perdue and Loeffler, Kelly Loeffler, um, the other Senate incumbent, really weren't working that well to get out the Trump base and to appeal to moderates. It was a disaster of a campaign. And even so, they lost by like 1.2 and 1.6, respectively. A relatively strong performance for them with everything else considered. I think you have like this mirage of the idea that Democrats will do better in runoffs because the main problem with runoffs is that the Democratic base in Georgia is built around the black vote. You have Fulton County, DeKalb, these suburbs. Republicans have been losing with suburbanites, but the reason these suburbs are shifting Democrat, and especially the southern suburbs, is because of demographic change. Henry County, it's not, 10% of Henry County was like, you know what? I'm a middle class suburbanite, and I voted for Donald Trump in 2020, but I think I've finally woken up, and I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris. That's not why. It's because you have a massive amount of African American black voters moving into places like Henry County, Rockdale County, Douglas, Paulding, Fayette, from areas like the Midwest, Detroit, for example, and taking their politics with them. Like, even if the GOP does better with black voters, like, almost every black voter that moves into Georgia is going to net Democrats votes. And that's exactly why Georgia is, to some extent, not looking like a good state for the GOP long term. The problem is black voters are lower propensity than the college educated Republican base, which Georgia is one of the few states where college educated voters not just are Republican, because that's already something big, but are insanely Republican. Like college educated voters in Georgia vote something like R plus 30, and they're barely trending Democrat. What happens in these midterms and in these runoffs is you see much fewer African Americans turn out. And even if Democrats do better with college educated voters, I'm not saying like, oh, yes, everyone who voted for Trump in 2024 is going to turn out and vote for a Republican candidate for Senate. You still do see Republicans put up a massive edge with college educated voters, with rural voters. And the problem is the rural voters will turn out more than black voters. It's just a fact. We've seen this in previous elections. I think there's a legitimate chance that if John Ossoff does not hit 50% in the general election, like I think he has like an 80% chance of losing at that point, no matter what happens, because you have the same factors working against Ossoff they did working against people like Walker. Because more than likely, if Ossoff is not hitting 50%, that race is going to a runoff unless another Democrat runs third party. Like Democrats have not won the Senate at that point. And if they haven't won the Senate, you're gonna have a lot of depression for a race like that because especially like 2022 having that 50th Senate seat for Republicans mattered for stuff like committees. It mattered for obviously taking back the Senate in 2024. And if people didn't turn out to vote for that, if Republicans are at 51 seats at least in the Senate, people are not going to turn out for a runoff to vote for a Democrat. So I legitimately think that even if Kemp is not the, as long as it's not MTG, I think that's a joke. That's from like Ossoff Stan on Twitter. But weird how Ossoff Stan is talking about all the people that MTG would beat, getting the Trump endorsement. Wow, it's as if he's biased. But I think Georgia, Ossoff is probably, I stress this, probably the most endangered Senate incumbent at this point. Definitely the most endangered Democrat incumbent. It's looking like Kemp still runs. I'd still say he's like a 50-60% chance of running, but even if he doesn't, Republicans do have a good bench in Georgia. Unless Ossoff can make major inroads with a college educated voter base and have a massive turnout machine with black voters, which like if this was the presidential race, but you had like 15% less turnout, Trump would have won Georgia by like five. Uh, Even if Kamala Harris, oh, she does so much better with college voters, he still would have won Georgia. Like the reason Georgia was close in 2024, and the reason it'll probably be a swing state in the future, is black voters continuing to turn out for these presidential elections in high rates. I don't think that happens in the midterms. Um, I still think Kemp runs, and I think honestly, the way it's looking, I don't even think Kemp needs a runoff. I think he's a strong enough candidate for that. If Kemp doesn't run, it's a legitimate toss-up. Um, I cannot call a favorite if Kemp is not going to run for Georgia Senate because the GOP has a strong bench that won by like 6 or 7 in 2022. Ossoff is a very overrated incumbent. Took down Purdue because Purdue ran a terrible campaign. Actually lost that Senate election on the first ballot by like 2 to 3%. Uh, he's got incumbency now though. He's relatively well liked, especially if you have a black nominee for governor with Democrats. He probably will have enough black turnout to benefit him, but it's definitely an under talked about Senate race, especially if Kemp isn't going to run. So I think Republicans gain Georgia because I still do think Kemp runs, and I think there's a legitimate chance that even if Kemp declines, it could end up flipping Republican. Um, North Carolina, it's going to be close. Uh, since I'm assuming Kemp runs, I'm going to assume that Cooper runs in North Carolina. I think Cooper could lose. Um, I think he could do a bit worse in suburban North Carolina. Like compared to like if you shift North Carolina 3.2% to the left, which means that it's a neutral state. Compared to that baseline, a Cooper win probably does worse in the suburbs but better in the rural areas. Cooper is going to try to narrow the Republican margin in the rural areas to win statewide. Like that is how he wins North Carolina. I'm not sure if that's going to work the way he's been associating himself recently. He's been associating himself with Cambridge Cooper, obviously going to teach at Harvard. He really hasn't signaled that he wants 100%. And even if he does, I think a lot of those associations are going to hurt him. I don't think Tillis does that good in the rural areas, though, but it's kind of like a race to the bottom for the rural areas. I still think this is just me being a bit of a pessimist, but I don't think Tillis is a good nominee. I think he got carried by Trump in 2020. I think he'll underperform in these rural areas a lot, and he really won't make it up that much in the suburban areas. So honestly, at this point, I think he loses by like 1.5%. Georgia, I think, is a much less tight margin. I think North Carolina is much tighter than Georgia. I'm starting to become more confident in Georgia the more I look at it. Um, but North Carolina, I still do think that at the end of the day, if Cooper runs, he should win. Now we also do have Wiley Nickel. I think is the former incumbent that ran, one of the people who was drawn out in 2024. But we do have another Democrat seeking the Senate seat. Kind of an indication that people are smelling blood in the water. But also an indication that Cooper isn't that likely to run. If Cooper doesn't run, I think it's a toss up as well. Because I think you'll have similar things to what I've talked about in Georgia, where black voters don't turn out. But at the same time, like Charlotte is not, Mecklenburg County is not Democrat solely because of black voters. You're not seeing these suburban areas lurch away from the GOP, and even some of these suburban areas hold stagnant because of black voters. Like black voters in North Carolina, you have the northeast of the state, you have Orange, Durham, and you have a few other areas. But for the most part, black turnout going down, I think is balanced out by the rural areas, and I think that Tom Tillis is probably killed by how bad he does in the rural areas. Um, So now we move on to the Northeast. New Hampshire, I think, legitimately will be not tilt, but lean. I think it'll be close. It's a very small state. It was the narrowest state behind Wisconsin. It was the narrowest Harris state by raw votes, and it was about the same as Wisconsin. That's about a 23,000 raw vote edge. That's much smaller than Michigan, Pennsylvania. Wisconsin was a little bit over 9,000, so like twice as much as Wisconsin, but the second closest state by raw votes. It's definitely going to be a competitive state. It did and kind of still does have an anti-incumbency trend, but even in 2022, 2022, had you asked me, I would have said like, yes, they have an anti-incumbency trend, but the GOP is dying in New Hampshire. But the fact that it swung so Republican in 2024, I think either it holds the anti-incumbency trend, but just for presidential elections, which hurts Democrat, then you can't apply it to Democrats, or it just doesn't have an anti-incumbency trend swung with the national environment. I think that this will be closer than people expect. Looks like the presumptive Democrat nominee is Chris Pappas, but also for a while, Republicans have expected that Scott Brown, the former senator from the Class 2 Senate seat, was going to seek his old job, or former Senate candidate from the Class 2 Senate seat. Um, he was in Class 1 Massachusetts. That's what I got confused. And he's going to seek the seat that he saw before and seek his job as a senator again. This time he has a lot more roots to New Hampshire. This time he won't be running against Senator Shaheen. I said this race was going to be a close Democrat win back when it was rumored Sununu would run. Even before it was rumored Sununu would run, I said this is going to be a close Democrat win. Scott Brown is a good candidate. Pappas is okay, but he hasn't really been tested um, to a full extent. It's a small state. Scott Brown's a good candidate. He can overperform a lot because it's a very small state, and it here, especially a local performance matters. Think like a Montana. Why did John Tester outperform so much more than Sherrod Brown? Even though arguably John Tester was running against a much stronger candidate than Sherrod Brown. It's a smaller state. You can know people more intimately. Um, it's easier to hit most voters with your ads when you're spending this a similar amount of money on Montana as on Ohio. You can campaign a lot more, reach most voters through that. Your name recognition is higher. I think you'll see a similar factor work against Democrats in New Hampshire, and even if the margin is the exact same um, as 2024, still a lean margin. I think it's slightly bigger, like a 3-point margin, but I still do think that this is a sleeper race. And that New Hampshire could potentially be close in 2026. Now, Maine, this is the hot take. I've been telling people privately uh, this for a few weeks, but I'm starting to worry about Susan Collins. I think she's really in some deep shit at this point. Her approval isn't great, but the more I've looked at it, she'll do better with a college educated base that turns out um, in these midterms. But like at some point, even if Democrats aren't going to run a strong candidate against her, I just think that one, her strength, the GOP base, isn't strong enough for an election like this, and two, you saw this to some extent in 2020. Um, her appeal to areas like the coastal elites of Maine is dissipating fast. Um, she probably would have won 2020 by like 5 points. 6, maybe, had that gone to a ranked choice voting runoff. She wouldn't have won by 9. The independents took more from her opponents than from her. That's a general sentiment. If people are voting against an incumbent for an independent, they'll probably vote against that incumbent uh, for the opposite party. General sentiment. Democrats really don't have a good bench in Maine. Don't expect Janet Mills to run. Don't expect Jared Golden to run. It looks like you'll probably get like a state senator, state rep, um, or someone of relatively low stature. It's going to be a hard race for Democrats nonetheless, and a lot of them are doing the risk assessment. I probably can't run the best general election campaign. I'll go for governor so I can win the primary, and then governor's probably safe Democrat in the general. All that being said, I just think what you'll see, it's not a Republican trending state. It's in fact pretty Democrat trending. The rural areas really aren't enough to win the state. Like, you can win Maine second by as much as you want, and even still Maine second, you're starting to get into some of these suburban areas like Bangor, some of the coastal areas, even some of the exurbs of Portland and Kennebec County. Like, you start to run the risk of, if even if you do well in the rural areas, even if Susan Collins gets the Republican base out, you still have to outperform with suburbanites. Will she outperform Trump? Yes. Will she do it by enough? My opinion, no. I think that she loses by a very narrow margin, but I would say that Maine, as of May 3rd, and when you're seeing this May 4th, 2025, I would say that Maine Senate ends up flipping Democrat by a very narrow margin, which means that the Senate Republicans net lose one seat. That's actually probably a first. Um, in my predictions, my opinion on Senate Republicans' outlook has soured a bit. As the polls have soured for people like Trump, and the generic congressional ballot. Though I do think this is more me looking into the states, looking into these primaries, starting to like take off the rose-colored glasses, from like, oh, my prediction was so great in 2024. I'll just have the exact same ideas applied again, because I do think a lot of the reason why I've considered Susan Collins the favorite is because one of my hot takes was that Maine was going to shift much more Republican than New Hampshire. And I've kind of still been in that general mindset for a little bit too long, overestimating Maine Republicans. Um, I think that that's been a mistake for me. And Georgia, also, I said, probably would be narrower than people realized. And I did do a bit of an 180 in public uh, after the election, because I thought that, like, I really I underestimated this. I thought that a lot of Trump's win would be due to decline in turnout in places like Fulton, DeKalb, and I was kind of right there. A lot of people did think that he'd do better in the suburbs, at least slightly better in the rural areas, like the Black Belt. You can do better in the Black Belt, but there's not too many votes there. But even though I've kind of done a 180 and said, like, Jesus Christ, Georgia might actually be a Republican state in the future. Obviously, won't go back to being like Republican plus 8. But this idea that like Georgia will inevitably become a Democrat state, I'm pushing back against that a lot. I think it finally, over the last month or so, set in a bit. Like, Jesus Christ, Democrats are screwed much more than they realize in an off-year election in Georgia. But we're a while out from the 2026 Senate elections. We're closer than back when I made the first predictions in November. And we're starting to see more candidates come into the playing field. Um, we're starting to see a lot of these elections be taken more seriously. After the 2025 elections, you're really going to see elections taken more seriously. Um, exactly what happened like after Wisconsin Supreme Court. People would take the 2025 November elections more seriously, and you're starting to see that happen. The primaries are like a month away. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun primary cycle, fun election to cover. But for now, I'd say this is a general outlook um, on how it stands. This can change. If you're here from the future, I'm probably wrong. Who knows? Maybe MTG actually ended up winning, or ended up winning the primary. Somehow defeated Ossoff by 10%, because she's just that good at turning out the GOP base. Maybe Wiley Nickel ran a terrible campaign in North Carolina. Or maybe Vivek Ramaswamy dropped out of governor and ran for Ohio Senate. Um, and then Sherrod Brown ran, just calling him an Indian, and saying that he'd make Ohio smell his bare feet that he interviews with. And Sherrod Brown wins that seat. Who knows? Things can change in a year. I'm not claiming to be a psychic, but around now, I obviously don't do the predictions as if the election were tomorrow. But around now, I'd say as we approach 2026, my guess is that the Senate map would resolve to something more like this. But anyways, thank you for watching. Fun video to make. Uh, I will have the gubernatorial prediction out tomorrow and that House prediction out eventually. But If you would like to help out the channel a lot, consider subscribing, liking, commenting down below, sharing with your friends, following the Twitter account in the description. Recently, I got the blue check, which means I'm better than you. I'm kidding. Uh, but I post a lot more of my uncensored takes on Twitter because I believe that is more of a free speech platform than YouTube. And you don't have to listen through me stuttering because I'm a fucking buffoon and have no idea what I'm going to say until it comes out my lips. But, anyways, thank you for watching. Godspeed. Tester's done.